everybody. I'm Dr. Christy Taylor, career and executive coach and founder of Work Global News magazine. And I am so excited about our feature interview today for our Changemaker series. Today we're talking to Dr. Katie Keller Wood. Dr. Wood is a TEDx and keynote speaker and a sought-after presenter for workshops and conferences. She specializes in Montessori education as both a pedagogy and a philosophy. And Katie believes that she just focuses on building a more peaceful, just, and equitable and sustainable world through her work. And as a fellow educator, I'm very excited to interview Katie today. How are you, Katie? Introduce yourself to our audience and let's learn more about you.
Hi, Dr. Taylor. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to be with you. I've shared with you that bringing a Montessori perspective of work to the world is just something I'm so passionate about, because I believe that the world needs every single one of us and all of our work matters, but we matter more. So I am just so thrilled to be with you today.
Listen, I've done a little bit of work, never in the Montessori space, but I'm familiar with the Montessori style of learning, no expert in it at all. But I'm just really excited because I think it brings a different perspective in terms of how individuals learn. But what I've never heard of this as Montessori as a lifestyle. So you have dedicated your work to bringing Montessori perspective to adult development, which is so different. Because I'm usually only, when it comes to children. Yeah. And you're bringing this to the adult perspective and the workplace. For those who are unfamiliar with Montessori style, can you just explain a little bit about this and why are you bringing this into the workplace? And why is it so needed today?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so most people haven't heard of Montessori education, so you're already ahead of the curve. But I would say that if people have heard of Montessori education, they really only heard of it for preschool. They know about it for the really little ones. And certainly there are more Montessori schools for small children than any other level. But I'm a little bit of an oddball in the Montessori community in that I've never worked with young children. I've actually only ever worked with middle and high school students. And so that's where my training is. And I have the great privilege of running CM STEP, which is a secondary Montessori teacher education program. So we work with middle and high school teachers all over the country, all over the world. And what I found in, discovering Montessori education for myself and for the teachers that are in our training program is that it's been more than just, a teaching style, more than just, how do we support students? Because Montessori education, based on the work of Dr. Maria Montessori, who was an Italian physician over 100 years ago, is really human-centered education. It's about how do we help each individual human being that we have the opportunity to serve grow into the fullest, most beautiful expression of themselves. And I think that you don't have to have had a Montessori education, I did not, to learn these things. And you don't have to be, part of the even tinier group of humans who went to Montessori teacher training to learn these things, right? And so I want to bring these messages, these ideas of how to, promote human thriving and adult development for the workplace, for the world, because it's been so transformational in my life.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you this because for those of us who, I'm going to tell you my experience in teaching adult learners in just K through 3. And I want you to give me just a baseline of like an example of how Montessori would be different, right? Okay. So, if you're teaching it in whether it's adults, well, typically I've taught in K through 3. Mm-hmm. But most of my background has been in adult education and learning too, but not a Montessori style. There may be principles associated with it that are similar, right? But I'm just taking this from the basic learning perspective. I know that you're going to design your lesson plan and it's kind of like I have these objectives that I need to hit for the whole class, right? And I have these points. How is Montessori learning different for those of us who've never heard of this at all? Can you just give me an example of how it would be different in a classroom so that we can apply it to before we even transition to the workplace?
Yeah, thanks. So I would say that what is different about Montessori education is we're still going to have those objectives. We're still going to have, what we want, where we want every learner to grow, what we want everybody to know, what we want everybody to be able to do. We just don't stop there. So we start equally with where do we want to go in terms of what do they need to know and be able to do and understand. We also start with who are they? who is this human who is with me right now? What are they interested in? What are they passionate about? What needs do they have? How do we meet them where they are to get them where they need to go? So a Montessori education, Dr. Carol Ann Tomlinson is famous in the world of education for her differentiation. The idea that you differentiate, you change up your instructional methods to meet the needs of learners, right? Well, Montessori, over 100 years ago, designed a method of education that was going to do that pretty naturally, right? So that all students are able to, learn and grow and develop at their own pace. Everybody's going to get there, but not everybody's going to turn on to reading at exactly the same moment, right? And we know that brains develop, at different times. So you're going to see, into Montessori classroom, lots of different aspects to support each individual human. And so when we extrapolate that to the world of adult learning, we see that even more, because adults come with so many different backgrounds and experiences and cultures and prior life experiences. And so if you're going to have meaningful adult education, you've got to make it meaningful, right? Adults are not interested in, somebody just pontificating for the most part, right? So they want to know, how do I do this? How do I make this applicable for my life? How is this going to change my life? Because we don't have time to waste, right? So, what does that look like in adult education? It looks like valuing that whole human, offering a variety of methods to get where you're trying to go, and involving them in the goal setting and self-assessment process, right? They know where they need to go. So how do we help and support them, and then let them decide, have they gotten where they need to go? Is it time for a new goal? What other things are needed to be supportive there?
Yeah, I love that. And I just learned something from you, because in K through 3, when I was in Texas, we call this inclusive classroom, but they never once mentioned Montessori. And if you're in a public school environment, we're doing this in these same principles, where we're not calling it that, right? And it definitely isn't a complete Montessori style classroom at all. It's right. Just, this adaptable learning where we have an inclusive classroom. Absolutely. Now, in your TEDx talk, you shared a story of little Max and how Montessori challenges the way that we define work. Yes. How can we as adults begin to reclaim that sense of joy and curiosity? Because as soon as you say work, and I want to point out to you, because most people say, well, how do you say the name of it's work? We spell our company WORXK, because we like to say that we are being the prescription. So you see that RX, right?
Love it.
I feel like what you're doing and the work that you are doing through the Montessori principles and applying it to adult learning and working and championing people in the workplace, that is part of the prescription to really get us to embrace this. So, as you answer that question, how do we find that sense of joy and curiosity in the work that we do every day?
Yeah, so I think it's really, again, Montessori being that very human-centered style of education, it's tapping into the most human parts of us, right? Human beings, we love to explore. We love to create. We love to build connections. We love to be useful, to help each other, right? So I think what's lost sometimes, why we need a work prescription is that we forget that work is really all about humans. It's by humans, it's for humans, it's to encourage human flourishing, right? So even if we're trying to create capital or earn more money, what is the point of that? The point of that is to encourage human flourishing, right? So that people have, access to all of the things that they need and to, share more and build bigger, so that, it's amazing how, the global poverty rate over the last 100, 200 years has changed so dramatically, right? But work is for humans, and humans like to work. We want to be of service. We want to be useful. And so, these lessons are such a part of the Montessori philosophy. But what I love about the story of Max, and just super briefly, Max was 3 years old. He was loving his Montessori school. But his dad went to his teacher, my friend Heather, and he said, my son Max, he likes school and everything, but he cries every weekend morning, and nothing's even happened. And I'm losing my mind because I love weekends and I want to share it with my family. And they're having this conversation, and Heather's like, okay, tell me more. And he goes, well, I every day I'm so excited. I just wake up and I shout to the family, like, hooray, hooray, no work today. And Max would cry. And Heather says, I see the problem. Here in our Montessori classroom, all these interesting and engaging activities, we don't call them toys, we call them work. And so for Max, to say no work today, you might as well have been saying no fun today, right? Because all these interesting and engaging activities, Max didn't have the cultural baggage that sometimes we adults bring to work, right? Like work is drudgery, work is the opposite of fun, work is the opposite of vacation, right? And so but I don't think it has to have those connotations, right? So to Max, work was interesting and challenging, and in that challenge, it was joyful. And I think that when we reconnect to ourselves, to the humanity of our work, when we find the why behind what we're doing, because everybody's contributing, right? A workplace, we need everybody. It's not just a one all-star doing everything all by themselves. Even if you're a solopreneur, you'd still have teams and people and family members who support you, right? And so I think it's about just reconnecting to that humanity to rediscover what does light us up in our work.
Yeah, I love that. And that's like I said, I love talking to individuals like you who have creative approaches, because we all have our unique kind of way, especially I work in organizational development. And so, but this is my very first time really hearing their principle of Montessori. So what you're offering is like something really unique and cool to me, Katie. And I'm going to get into the meat of this, because you lead CM Step, you teach across multiple universities, you speak globally, and you're releasing your first book. So I feel like I get it, but what inspired you to write Alignment, and why now?
Yeah, well, I think you do get it. I think that, for me, it was just recognizing that, there's something here it's changed my life. It's changed the lives of hundreds of teachers that I've worked with through the training program. And I would love to see the day, I go back to what you mentioned a minute ago, Dr. Taylor, where, you as an educator saw these Montessori principles. You didn't call it Montessori. And there's tons of those things, right? So Montessori was kind of one of the first to have child-sized furniture. Well, now all preschools have child-sized furniture. We don't expect a 3-year-old to sit on a grown-up sized chair, right? So I would love to see that continue. I hope that someday that we don't have to call them Montessori schools. We just call them schools. I'm so encouraged by the growth of Montessori in the public sector, in the way that is happening. There are over 500 public Montessori schools in the United States. It is far and away the largest alternative pedagogy in the United States. But that's still such a tiny proportion of humans, right? So if this is life-changing stuff, if this can impact our adult development, if this can change the way that people connect to work and help them find more joy, more meaning, more connection in the work that they do, then I want to bring it to everybody. And so I just think that there's so much here that we can redefine what work is, what work means, and that can lead us to live, as I describe it, more aligned lives, where all the pieces of our lives, can come together to support human flourishing.
And I do want to point out live in this video, whenever it premieres, that it wasn't until today when you said that about Montessori and gave a little back history that I recognized after all these years of teaching. Oh, that is an actual Montessori principle. So it is absolutely not something that they will say. They'll just call it adaptable learning, so adaptive curriculum. I want to talk about, because I want to get a picture of what this looks like in the workplace, right? Yeah. So you make a powerful distinction between paycheck work and purpose work. So as you answer this question and we talk about how someone can begin to identify their purpose work truly, I would like you to answer this in two parts, and I might have to do a follow-up, because how can somebody really begin the process of identifying that purpose-driven work, right? Instead of just being stuck in survival mode. And the other piece to this question is, what does that work environment look like?
Yeah.
I think I need a visual on that, because I'm the kind of person, when I go to work, I have about 36 projects, right?
Right.
And it just so happens I'm passionate about it, but what does that work environment look like to really try to maximize an employee's potential using these techniques?
Yeah. So I wrote this book, my book Alignment, in particular for people who love their work and they find great meaning in it. They know that it's how they're making a difference in the world, and they don't want to lose themselves completely to their work, right? So these are people where, I think, society says all you need is a little bit of work-life balance. Well, I reject the concept of balance. I talk about that in my TEDx.
I talk about work-life integration, because I'm like, I'm always working.
Yeah, because work and life are not polar opposites. We're not trying, like, it's not an over separation. Your work is an important part of your life. And so I propose instead we think of our lives as a beautiful mosaic where all the different pieces of our life get moved, aligned, and realigned, right? So we are constantly arranging and rearranging these pieces according to who we are and what we need right now. So for me, the reason that paycheck work and purpose work was so important was I needed a way to distinguish. It actually functions as kind of a filtering mechanism for me to know what to say yes to and when do I need to say no, because not that that thing isn't valuable or couldn't be important or couldn't help the world, but it's not my work to do. Right. So I had to think about, my paycheck work. That's what I've got to do to earn a paycheck. Right. And so hopefully, I mean, for me, there's a lot of overlap in my paycheck work and my purpose work. And that may be true for others as well. It may not be as true. And I want to be really clear. There's no blame. There's no shame in that. Right. But everybody has purpose work because purpose work is the unique brand of magic that you bring to the world, the stuff that only you can do. It is what you are meant to do and be at this moment and this time in your life. And so maybe that's raising children, maybe that's advocacy, maybe that's volunteering, maybe that's, it can be any number of things, voting, right? All these things can be a part of your purpose work. It's what you are meant to do and be right now. And there may be overlap with your paycheck work. But for me, having that distinction, when I realized that this was outside of my paycheck work, I didn't need to do it for my job, and it was outside of my purpose work, this is not the calling on my life right now, then I didn't need to say yes to those things. They were not supposed to be a part of my life mosaic. And if I couldn't get rid of them right now, then I needed to make a plan to get that off my plate, right? And so to me, paycheck work and purpose work, it's just helpful to have that distinction because if we're going to talk about work in this bigger way, when there's no cultural baggage to it, I like to think we're going to have purpose work for the rest of our lives, but our paycheck work, that's going to come and go. That's going to ebb and flow. We might not always have it at every season of our life, but we always have some bigger mission that we are bringing forward in the world, that work that only we can do.
And I think I was in a conversation with somebody a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about how I love what you say about the paycheck versus the purpose work and just really embracing where you are in this moment in life. I was at an event I was having a conversation on some similar topics where it's like, if at this moment in my life, I am flipping burgers, but it's like embracing where you are, because there's plenty of people right now who's listening to this is like, I've lost my job, I'm in transition, or I'm doing this, right? Just know at this moment in your life, the things that you're doing, and then that was kind of reinforced with an event I went to where a young lady was like, I know in this moment in my life that I am present in this moment. And I truly believe that's what you're saying by just embracing the fact that life is made up of mosaic. If you're a stay-at-home mom, that's nothing to be embarrassed about, right? That's important work. Driven work, right? Yes. Whatever, even where you serve in your local church or your community, whatever you're doing in this moment, that is where you should be in this moment. And that is, I love that visual of a mosaic.
Yeah.
Montessori
talks about this. She says that all work is noble, right? All work is noble.
There's dignity in work.
Yeah, it makes me that dignity in work. It reminds me of Dr. Martin Luther King's address to the Barrett Junior High, where he says, if it falls your lot to be a street sweeper, then sweep those streets like Michelangelo painted paintings, right? Like, be where you are. It's just what you're saying, Dr. Tim.
Yeah, and we're always in transition. Just because you are in this space in that moment, it does not mean that you will stay, right? Life is all about transition. It kind of, I take your mosaic and now I see a collapse.
It's always shifting. Yep.
Now you are a vocal critic of the traditional ideal of work life. Hey, you know what? It's a great segue, because I will use work-life balance sometime, but I really like to say work-life integration. Mm-hmm. But I want to, before I even put the question out there, I do want to say, guys, when we talk about this, we also saying use some common sense. It does not mean to wake up at 1 a.m. in the morning and you're doing business meetings, unless you maybe with somebody overseas or something on a different time. So for those people who, I always tell my clients, like, that doesn't mean that after you're 8 to 5 that you're still at the computer. No, that's not what we mean when we're using different language than work-life balance. So I love the fact that you're a critic of this traditional idea. I think you've already kind of explained, but can you share again a little bit more deeper why that concept of alignment is a more empowering and realistic approach for today's professionals.
Thank you. So I already mentioned, I like to think of, instead of this giant scale with work and life kind of trying to oppose each other, that I think of our lives as a beautiful mosaic made up of all the pieces, and it's always changing. So we're going to grow pieces, we're going to shrink them, we're going to shift them. You can't prioritize having your children before you have them, right? So there's pieces that are going to come into your life. There's going to be pieces that leave your life. So alignment, I love that there's Oxford Languages actually gives 2 definitions for alignment, and I love both of them. So the first is that you can say things are in alignment when they're in their correct and appropriate relative positions. And so to me, that's our mosaic pieces. Are they in the correct, appropriate, relative position for this moment in our lives, right? And or does something need to be bigger or smaller or come out of the mosaic altogether, right? So that's one piece of it. But the other thing is that Oxford Languages says, the other definition is, you can say that things are in alignment when they have a position of agreement or an alliance. And that image to me is where all the pieces of our life mosaic work together to support our holistic thriving. And so the story that I like to tell here is that very often when we're out of alignment, when we know something isn't right, we're quick to go to the work part of our lives. And that absolutely may be the issue, because, our workplaces matter, and, we can talk about what leaders can do to support alignment in our workplaces. But sometimes we also need to look at the other pieces of our life mosaic. And so in my TEDx, I share the story of my sister, Abby, who is an amazing award-winning oncology nurse, right? So she works with the sickest of the sick, inpatient oncology at a major university hospital. And she had loved her work. She was great at it. But she was, called me up one day and asked me, how do you know when it's time to quit your job? And my heart just sank, because I knew the difference that she was making in the world. I knew how much she loved her work, how passionate she was, but she was overwhelmed. And the thing of it was the fall of 2020. Right. So we knew how hard everything was for hospital workers. But, I said, Abby, your work has always been hard. Do you think it would feel the same level of hard if you had been able to see your family? If you had been able to go to the gym like you usually do? If you had, right, all these other pieces of her life mosaic that usually supported her important but hard work, they weren't there. They weren't able to support her in that normal way. And it was such a lesson for me that, yes, work did need some revamping, and she did make some changes there. I'm happy to say she didn't walk away from a profession that she loves, but she had to make some changes there. She also had to look at the rest of her life mosaic, because if she couldn't have these pieces supporting her like usual, she had to figure that out, right? And it wasn't a quick process. There's no quick fix to this. But it was spending a lot of time with herself and figuring out, who is she as a human? What does she need to be able to do her work joyfully and well in the world? And then how does she go about building those supports, even in a time when they were less possible, right?
I love the personal examples that you have given, right? And the uniqueness of these Changemaker interviews is that people are going to be able to relate to you from a personal level. I say it every interview. But I think what you just posed here brings another question to mind, because we can actually circle to, what does alignment look like, not just for an individual, because you shared your sister, and so many nurses turned over, right, as a result of what happened. It was such a turnover rate. And you kind of work in the same space as me. We're both educators. So when I talk about the prescription, obviously it comes from healthcare, right? Yeah. But this nonprofit, this healthcare education nonprofit space, and we recognize that some of the challenges of there are limiting with resources and some of the pushback and that people experience. So you talk a lot about the individual, but I also want you to give the perspective of alignment from the workplace perspective. What does a truly aligned organization look and feel like? Because I think the examples you gave with your sister is perfect. It's a perfect segue.
Right. Yeah. So, and I think this is really big, important work. It's, it's where I thought my book was going to go. When I first set out to write a book, I was like, I'm writing a book about systems and organizations. And I wonder, maybe that book will still come to fruition. So this book about alignment really is kind of that personal journey. But here's the thing, my life mosaic is connected to everyone else's, right? So we're not islands, we're all interconnected. And so, when I talk to leaders and I talk to change makers and I, bring this message of alignment, it's like, first you've got to get, your own house in order, right? So what does it look like to live your own aligned life? Because leaders are models, right? They set the tone for the organization. They're what sets the norms, right? So if you're sending off emails at 2 a.m, right, but you're like, oh, don't worry about it. No, okay, no, I'm worried about it, right? So
Yeah.
So I think leaders have a responsibility to go first, to model the way. But then we're going to build workplace cultures. Again, this is about showing up in our fullest humanity. And so, what does that mean to create a kind of place where people really are able to show up and bring their very best self, right? To bring all of who they are for this place, and to honor, everyone's individual alignment. So how do we, support what different people need at different times?
I really just have enjoyed interviewing you, Katie, because you had a lot of great personal examples. You really are able to take these years of experience. Sometimes educators, we kind of get stuck on, like, I'm the fact that I'm an educator, right? That all of these things that we're doing, that we can't transition and do something else with it. You took a principle that you learned as an educator, and then you're using it to educate other people and empower, and you're bringing it to the workplace. And this, again, as somebody who works in organizational development, I absolutely love the perspective that you're bringing to the table, because I 100% champion the idea that leaders have to go be the example. You can't say, don't check your email at 3 a.m. and you're sending out emails at 2. And
right.
You know what I mean? So my last question to you is, for someone who's just beginning to feel that nudge, that their life and work are kind of out of sync, actually, this is my next to last switch, because I have to ask you, what do you have coming up next, right? So I was like, okay, they give us that prescription, right? Like that last question about writing that prescription. But for someone who's just beginning to feel that nudge, that their life and work are out of sync, what's one piece of advice that you want to offer to them?
So I think the first thing I want to say is, you're already on the path, right? If you're feeling that nudge, that means you're tuned into yourself enough to know that something is out of alignment. And I want to celebrate that, because I think a lot of people just kind of march through life without really tuning into themselves and who they are and what they need and what they're meant to do and bring forward in the world. So if you're already just feeling that nudge, then I want to celebrate it, because you're on the path. Right. And then from there, I think that it's about, really starting to think critically about your life mosaic. What is a part of it? What deserves to be a part of it? How do you make decisions about how you're spending your time, your money, your energy, right? And who and what deserves those things? Your paycheck work is important for your paycheck. Got to do it, right? Or get a new one, right? But your purpose work, there's so many things that you can grow, that you can shrink, that you can add in, that would create that joyful life of thriving for yourself. And so I am just passionate about adult development, because I don't believe that we're powerless. I believe that we can all create containers of human thriving for ourselves and for the betterment of others. And I think it takes all of us.
So again, Dr. Katie Wood, writing a prescription for change. I love workplace physicians, as you see. Katie, what do you have coming up? Where can people contact you? What do you have coming up? And of course, we're going to have all your information in the description box, but what do you have coming up in the next few months?
Well, thank you so much. So my book, Alignment, which is a Montessori approach to reimagining work-life balance, is available now wherever books are sold for pre-order. So it will be released on September 23rd, and it will be available in audiobook, in paperback, in ebook, all the forms. And so I hope to, be around. People can connect with me at katiekellerwood.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. I've got a couple of newsletters that people can follow, where I keep folks updated as to where am I speaking next and what's coming up next. So I want to just thank you so much, Dr. Taylor. It's been a true pleasure to share with so many change makers and offering, maybe a little bit more of the prescription. So thank you for having me.
I absolutely have enjoyed interviewing you, Katie. You have a unique perspective and approach. I appreciate anyone, first of all, just as a fellow educator, but just I always appreciate anyone who comes to this platform and shows their unique approach and shares their unique short story and experiences. And thank you guys for tuning in today, wherever you're listening in or watching this. And don't forget to check out Katie's article on workglobalnews.com, WORXK globalnews.com. And you can find us across all social media platforms at Work Global News. Have a great day. Thank you, Katie.